So we're going to talk about the structure in Czech anatomy history. I really like this poem because I think where with most poems it's easy to talk about language, this poem actually there's a lot to say for form and structure, which is a bit more interesting, and you can get a really perceptive analysis by doing it in the exam. So we'll talk about the juxtaposition to start with, and I think the use of juxtaposition is a really interesting one to talk about in this poem. I've had to swap books because I've just spilled tea on my other poetry anthology, so we'll use this book. So you see juxtaposition here, so it's all the way through. So you've got this bit where it says, tell me about 1066 and all that, tell me about Dick Whittington and he cat. But Le Toussaint Overture, I'm not sure how to say that. No, they'll never tell me about that. And me not knowing how to say that shows I wasn't taught about that in history. And we then have the history of this figure. He tells us all about this figure from Black history. And this person, Toussaint, is a ruler who led the slaves to victory in the Haitian Revolution. So a really heroic and notable and significant figure that's been omitted from Black history. But what we're talking about is the juxtaposition. So you've got the juxtaposition of British English, British history, what we are teaching. So the nursery rhyme of Dick Whittington and his cat, and yet we are completely omitting. We're not teaching about this heroic, important, significant figure from Black history at all. So the juxtaposition of the trivial nursery rhymes with this quite serious and important Black history is used to emphasise how biased and ridiculous and farcical the British history curriculum is. The fact that we are teaching nursery rhymes in our history lessons and as part of our culture, but we're not including figures like this. So the juxtaposition of the trivial with the really serious and heroic really emphasises the flaws in the history curriculum. And you see that throughout the poem. So the next example of juxtaposition is tell me about the man who discovered the balloon and the cow who jumped over the moon. So again, using these nursery rhymes as an example of British history makes it seem trivial compared to the again really important figure that's been omitted from the British history system of Nanny de Maroon, who was actually the leader of the Maroons, the runaway slaves who led the Jamaican resistance against the British Lord Nelson, and she died in the Battle of Trafalgar. So she gave her lives to protect slaves. Again, and it makes you feel ashamed of the British history curriculum that we're including such trivial nursery rhymes when we're not including such significant and important figures such as Nanny de Maroon. We've then got, and this one isn't as trivial, this example from British history, but it's again a very interesting juxtaposition. So we've got tell me about Florence Nightingale and Lamp, and we've all heard of Florence Nightingale, haven't we? We've all heard those stories about her being a hero of war, but then we've got like sort of the nursery rhyme sort of story again, and how Robin Hood used to camp. Them tell me about Old King Cole was a merry old soul, but them never tell me about Mary Seacole. And I really like this juxtaposition of Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole, because we've all heard of her. I imagine pretty much all of you have heard of Florence Nightingale, but how many of us have heard of Mary Seacole? I certainly hadn't. And he tells us all about her. From Jamaica, she travelled far to the Crimean War. She volunteered to go, and even when the British said no, she still braved the Russian snow. A healing star among the wounded, a yellow sunrise to the dying. So quite similar to Florence Nightingale. Mary Seacole was a nurse, and she helped the sick people. She helped them during the Crimean War. So why are we making a hero of Florence Nightingale but completely omitting Mary Seacole? So that juxtaposition again just serves to emphasise the biased nature, the white bias, the whitewashing of British history. We're celebrating Florence Nightingale, but we're completely ignoring Mary Seacole, even though they both achieved quite similar things, they did quite similar things. So the juxtaposition throughout the poem is there to ridicule whitewashing of the British history curriculum and really emphasize how biased it is, how ridiculous it is, and how trivial some of the curriculum is compared to the serious and significant aspects of Black history that are completely disregarded. It creates a sense of shame in that system, and I think it's a really, really clever and interesting method to look at the use of juxtaposition.